So this is the third webinar on dealing with discipline issues, and we've been talking about different cases in each of the webinars that we have done. So we've had case one in which we talked about a group, and then we had case two in which we talked about dealing with specific students. And today we're going to be talking about a different thing, actually. Instead of having one case that we're going to be studying, we're going to be focusing on different cases. And it's going to be different cases because we're going to be tackling how we can use differentiation to deal with discipline issues in Cultura in groups. And of course, whatever we discuss here today is actually applicable to any other lesson in any other branch. We're going to start then talking about what differentiation is and why use it in our lessons. Then we're going to talk about some examples of how differentiation can be used. And finally, we're going to discuss some other ideas that can be interesting for us to tackle in the light of this idea of differentiating how we teach. So this is going to be case 3, but it's also case 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, because hopefully this will be applicable to many different cases and not only to one specific case, one specific context in which we teach, which is like the difficult group or the troublemaker. I mean, this is really meant to be something a little bit broader in the sense of helping us deal with different contexts. So what are the cases that we're going to be sort of focusing on, just to get this sample of what we can differentiate? Well, first of all, we're going to be talking about a STARS 1 student, and he's the 5-year-old among 6-year-olds. He's how do we deal with that younger student in our classroom? We're going to be talking about the teenager 1 group with 21 students, so the challenge of individualizing here. And we're going to be talking about the teenager one group as well, and in relation to projects and the choice of giving the choice. How do we deal with this idea of giving a choice to students, right, when it comes to projects? Before we get started with the cases themselves, I would like to start this discussion. What do you know about differentiation? Have you heard of it? Have you explored it? Have you tried it in your lessons as well? Where are we coming from? Okay. Oh, that's nice, because then it's going to be something completely new. Basically, then differentiation is our response to learners' needs. It's really focused on how we respond to what we perceive as what our learner needs. It's shaped by mindset, so it really depends on how we see learners' needs, because there's different ways to looking at what a student needs. For example, there might be that student who is an underachiever and he's just not keeping up with the group, and then we have two options. We can go and say something like, well, he's like this and he might fail because he won't be learning, he's not keeping up with the pace, and there's nothing I can do about it. And another mindset would be, well, he's falling behind in relation to other students. What can I do to actually compensate for this lack of something, perhaps, or for this different needs that he might be facing that I haven't been catering for? And then there is different principles of differentiation. So we have to devise respectful tasks, tasks that will respect the student's pace and the student's preferences, for example. We have to have quality curriculum. So when we talk about including things in our curriculum, is it the kind of thing that will be conducive to learning? We need to have flexible management. So that has to do with classroom management and management of the lessons themselves. So understanding that our plan is not exactly what is meant to necessarily happen in the lesson, that we can actually flexibilize what we have planned in order to cater for what students actually need. There's continual assessment, so we need to keep assessing students in the sense of seeing how things are going and understanding if everything's going okay, if they're coping with what we've been offering in our lessons, and building community. There has to be some sort of relationship of trust between teachers and students and between students themselves, so that we can actually help each other with what we have as talents and best abilities. Do you have any questions in relation to this? Good morning, Alcione. Welcome to the webinar. Yeah, I think it really depends on your question then about pace. I think it really depends on your objective with the task that you're proposing. Let's say, for example, that your objective is to guarantee that everyone will finish the task and that everyone will have this task done in their notebook so that they can take it home because they have to study it later, for example. Then yeah, I think it's okay for you to cater for this student's pace in the sense of giving him more time, giving her more time, and all the while guaranteeing that the students who have finished fast and the students who have a faster pace might also be catered for, because we do have those students who will need a little bit more time to do things, but we also have students who will finish very fast, and we have to guarantee that both of these students have their learning maximized. So if you haven't finished your task, it's okay, I'll give you more time, you can do it like this, or maybe he didn't finish or she didn't finish because they need some sort of support, and then you have to think of what kind of support you're going to give that student. And the fast finishers, the ones who have finished, their challenge is over by the time the task is over, so maybe you can just propose another challenge for them and let them do something that will lead them a little bit further, so that they also don't feel like they're not being catered for, because there might be this feeling sometimes that one student is receiving more attention than the others, and it's not fair because this student is getting more time from the teacher, you know. So you do have to cater for these, and I think it's all about the planning, what you're gonna plan to do if students finish too fast or if students don't finish within the time that you were planning. Does that make sense to you? Okay, if you have any more questions, I'll see you as well. Please post them here so we can answer them throughout the webinar. Okay. Well, so these are the principles of some of the principles of differentiation according to Carolyn Tomlinson. And how can we differentiate? Basically, there's 4 different ways that we can differentiate. So there's content, process, product, and effect or environment. So content in the sense of I'm going to change the content that I'm providing to my students so that they all learn the same way, or they all achieve a certain level that I'm aiming at helping them reach. Or I can differentiate through process. So instead of you having to, I don't know, write a text, you're gonna have to, I don't know, answer these questions. And in both ways, I'm giving different students the tools to achieve the same results, but through different paths. You can differentiate through product, and that has to do with the outcome. So how am I going to know that this learner has learned what they were supposed to learn? For example, this learner here, he prefers to be assessed. I'm sorry, not prefers to, but we have decided to assess him through I don't know, a video that he has to make, and then he's going to be speaking and using the things that he has learned in speaking. This has to do with the process as well, of course, but then I'm going to be assessing, I don't know, his vocabulary or grammar use through the content of this, I'm sorry, the result of this video, the outcome of this video, whereas another student can just write a composition to me, and I'm going to be assessing vocabulary and grammar as well. So it really depends, because you have to explore the kind of needs that each student has. And of course, we can also challenge students who are not necessarily in their element when doing something to do something different. So I know that this student will do really well if they write a composition. So I'm going to be asking him or her to make a presentation. And it might be a bit uncomfortable, but I'm giving him the chance of exploiting something different. And then I have this idea in mind from the beginning. And this can also be a way in which you're going to differentiate, helping them explore different ways of learning. And we can also differentiate through effect and environment. So we change the way we relate to different students depending on the kind of affection really that they need. So the kind of attention that they need, the kind of emotional support, because we know that students might feel anxious and some of them might have their affective filter just blocking every kind of learning that might be happening. And we also need to take that into account when differentiating. We also have to differentiate according to students' readiness. So is this student ready to deal with this content, ready to work with this product? Is this student ready to achieve this certain level of I don't know, linguistic competence, for example, according to students' interests? So is it going to be something that will personally interest that student? Is it something that will be, you know, the kind of thing he will be just naturally motivated to do? And finally, according to students' learning profile, and that involves a variety of different profiles that you can take into account. So it can be the idea of visual, kinesthetic, and auditory, right-read students, for example, or it can be the multiple intelligences theory. It really depends on what you're going to be resorting to actually make these kind of decisions. What is important here to realize is that all of these different steps of differentiation, they all give us tools or sort of guidelines to help us group students according to their strengths, according to their needs, according to their preferred way of learning. And we can mix and play with these groups. So I'm going to group these students who all learn from, I don't know, reading and taking notes, and they're going to do a task that explores that. They're going to have their learning maximized because they all like and prefer and do better when they are reading and taking notes. And I'm going to get all of these groups and I'm going to make them discuss something connected to grammar instead of reading and writing and copying. And then again, I'm also helping them maximize this learning moment. And then again, I'm grouping them because of the knowledge that I have of my group. Of course, there's a variety of instructional strategies such as these here that are listed below. And these are only a few ideas. And it's, if you think about them, these are the things that we have been doing. But I think differentiation helps us. I mean, the idea of studying what differentiation is helps us understand that we can do things in a more systematic and consistent way. So I'm going to scaffold reading. Why? And why will I scaffold this student specifically? How am I going to scaffold the reading of this student specifically? And this is the kind of decision that we have to make in a very conscious way. And I think studying differentiation can help us do that. This table comes from a book. You can see the reference down here. It was adapted by Carolyn Tomlinson. She wrote a book with Souza called Differentiation and the Brain, and they connect neuroscience and learning, and that's very interesting. What is important to bear in mind, though, is that we have all of this table, but we start here. We start exploring our response to learner needs, and when we talk about the response that we are giving, it really has to do with analyzing the kind of reaction students have, the kind of response students have to certain activities, to certain linguistic items, exploring the kind of things that motivates them. Was this lesson boring? Why was it boring? Who was bored? And is there any specific student who needs a little bit more support? You know, it's really about analyzing these needs. But let's talk about the cases themselves. I think enough with theory here. Let's talk about how we can apply these things. Well, let's focus on the 5-year-old among 6-year-olds. Some of the ideas that we can use that come from differentiation is, the first thing we need to bear in mind is what needs to be differentiated in a case like this. We all know that in our STARS lessons at Cultura, you might not have that amount of grammar and vocabulary that is being covered in the sense of let's systematize things and look at the formula of what we're teaching. So how can we differentiate? Well, we can think about our expectations first. So what is the cognitive development of that kid? What is the kind of things that he or she at the age of 5 will be able to do, or will not be able to do, that the others in the room will? And in relation to motor skills, what is the kind of task that I can propose to this student that will make them feel comfortable enough to perform the task, and that won't frustrate them because they just can't handle the tools that I'm giving them? So for example, of course, they know how to cut things, and they're starting to learn how to color things within a given space. For example, if I tell them to color the toys that they have on their piece of paper, the 6-year-olds might be able to color within the lines of the drawing, whereas the 5-year-old might find it a bit difficult, or might not even understand why he or she should color within the framework. And we can differentiate in that sense. So would that be okay to give that student the freedom to not color within the frame? Yes, absolutely. And that would be okay because he's achieving what he can achieve at that moment. Or maybe you can give the challenge of, okay, but this time I want you to focus very carefully on not coloring, beyond this line. And maybe this can be the kind of challenge that will help them develop motor skills that can be very useful throughout their years in school. We have portfolio activities as well, which means that we are constantly assessing students and we are following their progression throughout the course. How can we use these portfolio activities to make decisions? So let's say that I noticed that my student has been just coloring everything with whatever color they choose to, and these colors don't necessarily, represent the real colors that they will see in real life. Maybe this can be the kind of thing that I use to teach them some, vocabulary. So working with different colors and helping them associate certain objects with certain colors, so that in the portfolio activities, he or she will be coloring things in a way that makes sense. Of course, it's us establishing the standard, but in a way that makes sense to people who will be seeing the portfolio, who are parents. And also, of course, we have the idea that everybody will be doing the same portfolio activity sometimes, and we can differentiate through that as well. So instead of you having to, draw your favorite toy, I'm going to be bringing you a picture, different pictures of toys, and you have to color the one that you like best. And then they're not going to have to go through the trouble of drawing everything, because sometimes their drawing can look a little bit strange, and then if parents don't recognize it and they say, well, but this doesn't really look like a, doll, this might be frustrating for students. And we do have students who will complain about that. Like, okay, draw a doll, and they'll go, I don't know how to draw a doll. And that's okay. I think this is a moment for us to analyze things and differentiate. And social skills. There is one case in particular in which I have, in which there's this stars one group that I have. And I have a 5-year-old in this group, and he just doesn't know how to interact with the others. He's very much enclosed in his own little world. And that is okay. That is okay because it's his development. But at the same time, he just doesn't get along very well with his peers. And sometimes, instead of telling him to do things together, maybe I can tell him to do things individually while the others are doing things with each other. And that's okay, because they'll be maximizing their learnings in different ways. And sometimes I can challenge him to do something that will help them develop these social skills. Again, it's making conscious decisions. Let's move on. I'm sorry, is this okay? Do you have any questions about this part here? All right, Alcione, okay as well? Okay, great. If you do have any questions, remember that you can just type them here and we'll attend to them, okay? Okay, moving on then. The challenge of individualizing. I think that this is one of the greatest questions that we may have. How do we differentiate in a classroom of 21? Or when you're working at entry, how do you differentiate in a classroom of 25, 26? And I think something that is really important in groups as big as this one is to keep a record. We do have to ensure that we have information about different students throughout the term. So we need to find a way to organize our notes, or having a space in our notebooks just to write down information that we might find relevant so that we can make better decisions. We can keep a record of students' performance, or we can keep a record of students' preferences, keep a record of students' difficulties and aptitudes. So I think it's really key that we know what we're looking for. If you go back to the table, for example, I'm gonna click here again. Let's say that I see that my students are just, I don't know, not coping with the tasks. So I'm focusing on respectful tasks here, and I'm going to be looking at their performance in relation to this task here. So whenever I assign them a reading task, they just can't cope with it. They don't understand what they have read. They don't understand what they are supposed to do, for example. Then I have to devise tasks that will be more respectful to their pace, to their linguistic competence, and this sort of thing. Or my students are always bored. Why are they always bored? Maybe you have to individualize in the sense of differentiate, focusing on preferences. Anyways, it's really important for us to keep this record, because then you can start to see patterns. You can also work on grouping students, again, after you have understood some patterns. So these students here, they do really well when we have a grammar-focused exercise in which you have to fill in the gaps. And these other students, they learn best when they just look at the formula and then apply it to a set of exercises. So you can group students according to that, and you can go like, okay, so you guys are going to do this gap fill exercise. You guys are going to look at this formula and you're going to solve these problems here. You guys, you're going to have to correct these sentences. And they're all working with the same topic, but they're grouped according to different skills that they have. And this can help them learn better. On the other hand, you can also do the opposite. So you don't do very well with gap fill exercises, so I'm going to give you a gap fill exercise so you feel a different type of challenge. And then you can scaffold that in the sense of, look, this is what you have to do, this is how I want you to do, so I'm going to model the first one to you, and there you go. Now you can try it. But you can only make that decision if you have it very clear in your mind that that student specifically will need this sort of support, or will profit from this sort of challenge. We also have to remember to assess continuously, and that's really important. You need to keep looking at students' performance, preferences, difficulties, aptitudes, and reassessing everything. Is this student getting better at reading? Is this student learning to deal with topics that he or she doesn't really like to talk about? Are the difficulties that he or she had in the beginning of the term the same as they have right now? Of course, this gives us some extra work, but it's really about systematizing the kind of thing that we do in our lessons. So let's say when they're talking to each other because they have to perform a conversation, I'm going to be monitoring not only for language, but for their performance. I have a checklist of all the names, and I'm going to tick all of the names of the students who are doing well in this specific speaking task. And this can be one way of helping us assess and helping us keep a record of their performance, for example. In order to assess students, we need to have, of course, clear goals and assessment criteria. We need to know exactly where we want to get so that we help all students get there through different paths. And we need to have in mind the criteria that we are going to be using in order to assess students. And this can come from the guidelines, because we have the CEFR framework there, for example. This can come from, I don't know, their performance in the test. This can come from the speaking assessment framework that you have, or the writing assessment framework that we have. So you can use these different tools that we already have available as your part of your assessment criteria. And of course, I think something that's very interesting for students is they also have to know these criteria. it's important to let them know what they're going to be expected to be doing after a certain task or during a certain task, and what they're going to be assessed on, so that they also have that in mind when performing the task. Does this make sense? Does this help individualize a little bit of the kind of decisions that you make in larger groups? Or do you have any questions in relation to this? Okay, okay, good. All right, and then again, you don't necessarily, and this is something important to remember, you don't necessarily have to focus on differentiating using all the principles and using all the ways of differentiating in every single lesson. Yes, absolutely, Ocean, it's really essential that they know the criteria. I think it helps them self-assess, if you think about this, and it lowers anxiety in a certain way. We're going to move on then to explore the last case I'm going to propose, and then we're going to be talking about some other ideas that we can use. The choice of giving the choice. I really like this one because I think that the idea of using projects in our lessons for teenagers especially can be very helpful when it comes to differentiating. I think that it gives us a very powerful tool because the project is something that sets a clear goal to students. It's something that is continuous, so you have a chance of assessing continuously, and it's something that helps us establish a very clear criteria with students. So this is what you have to be doing, and by the end of this project, this is what I'm gonna want you to be able to perform. And then you can use this to set the bar with students. Well, as I said, there's clear goals and assessment criteria when it comes to projects. I think it's important that we offer options to students. So the guidelines themselves will give us different options of projects, and we can use these different options to help our students choose the kind of things that they are more interested in. Of course, does this mean you're going to have a little bit more work in relation to planning the kind of projects you're going to do? Yes, it is, but it's really about adapting the kind of lessons that you have. If you think about how the project goes, you could vary the way that you use the project moments suggested in the guidelines. So on one day you can have students focus on one option, and then the other you can focus on another option, and students can be helping each other when they're not working on their own project, for example. This can also be a way of helping them explore their own abilities and skills, and this can be very profitable in the sense of building up projects together. So again, we have the choice of project from the guidelines. You can also let them choose how they're going to assemble the project. So is it going to be in their notebooks? Are they going to record what they're going to do? So is it going to be an audio? Is it going to be a video? Are they going to be using, I don't know, Post-its on Padlet to be assembling their project? If you give them options, this can already help them explore different skills and their different abilities. If there's going to be a presentation, like the final outcome of the project, you can also offer options in that sense. So do all students necessarily have to come up with a poster? Well, not necessarily. Maybe one student can just write a text talking about the project, and the other student can actually prepare a poster, and the other students can actually record a video, and the other student can, I don't know, present it to peers using bullet points. It really depends on how you're going to offer these options, and we have to take into account the kind of abilities that students have in relation to their age. Of course, you're not going to ask a T1 to I don't know, record a video at home and bring it to class, but you could perhaps ask a T6 to do this kind of thing. Or you might not, students who are taking the Teenager 6 courses, A or B at Entry, or Teenager 6 at Cultura, they might not feel very comfortable with, I don't know, like drawing things and decorating the whole poster or the paper. Maybe it might not be the kind of thing that they like to do, but for a T1 that can be very helpful. So it really has to do with offering the options that might help them explore these different abilities. I think it's very important that we keep track of what students are doing. So again, keep a record of their performance, their preferences, their difficulties, their aptitudes, what parts of the project have been easier for them, what parts of the project have given them a hard time, and are my students moving on with the project? Because some students might just, I don't know, not really be taking notes of what they should be doing, or might not really be building up the project because they're either missing lessons, or when it's project time, they're not really working on their project, or because they need more time to work on the project. Instead of having only 10 minutes in the classroom, they need time at home to do that. So you really need to be aware of what's going on with them so that we give them different support. And this can come in, of course, a variety of ways. It can be support outside the lesson, or it can be during the lesson you have some 5 minutes to talk to some students who are having more trouble individually, or at the end of every lesson you call three students, different students every time, so that you can just take a look at their projects and see how things are going, and then you can give them some individual support because you've talked to them individually. I don't know. And finally, you can also work on letting students assess their own work. So remember that the assessment criteria is there, and the goals are very clear from the get-go. So why not let students assess their own work? So are you happy with it? And I don't know, in the T1 we have the superhero project. So is your superhero very powerful? Is this the superhero you had in mind? If you're not happy, then what could you do to improve it? What do you think you didn't do that you could do to make this superhero stronger, or to make this superhero more similar to the superhero you had in mind? This can all be different ways of helping students become more aware of their own work and how they can improve. You can have students work in groups, for example, and they look at each other's work and they go, well, I think your superhero has a lot of tools already and mine doesn't. So what did you do? What are the tools that you have? And then they can exchange ideas in that sense as well. So these are different ways of giving choices within the framework of a project. Do you think that these ideas are applicable to the projects that we work with in our teenager groups? Okay, great. There was an idea that I think it was Andrea Zacchini who told me about this idea, and I found it brilliant, and I think it helps us a lot in this process of working with the project. That is, we can have students have separate a part of their notebooks for the projects, and then in every lesson B in which we have to work with a project, you can tell them to go back to that page or that part of the notebook and tell them, okay, today you're going to be doing this. And then, for example, in the case of the superhero, the first thing that I told my students to do was you're going to decide the name of your superhero. And then they just had to write, my superhero is, and then they would go like, it's Mr. Basoka. My superhero is Super Unicorn. My superhero is, I don't know, Flexible Girl. You know, I mean, they came up with a variety of things. And when they came up with a name, they had a superhero in mind. And then in the following lesson, in the following B lesson, they have to choose, I don't know, the physical appearance of the superhero, and then they had to write, my superhero is very tall, my superhero isn't really fast, my superhero is very flexible, I don't know, or is beautiful. And then every week they would go back to this notebook and add information about the superhero. So they would do bits and pieces of the project in the classroom together. And this is something that gave me the chance of helping students more individually. So you go and you see if they're doing it, if they're not, if they need some support. If they miss a lesson, you can see it because there is a gap in the project. So where there should be, I don't know, the abilities of the superhero, there's nothing. So you can go and offer some support in that sense. And I think using this idea of the notebook can be very helpful to keep track of what students are doing. So this is what we had for case 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. This is the idea that we can use differentiation to help our students in Cultura in groups learn better. And of course, this can be applicable to our groups in the branch as well. Do you have any other ideas that we could use to help differentiation happen in the classroom, or anything that you have tried before that worked or didn't work and that you would like to bring up? Hard to come up with things from the top of our heads, right? Well, if you can't remember any case or any situation in which, oh wait, Tamara is saying something. Yes, absolutely, Tamara. And I think using students' contribution is something invaluable. Differentiation has to do with that. So you learn in each cases their contribution will be more relevant and more helpful to the learning environment as a whole, and then you make decisions to help students maximize that. Okay, cool. And do you think that the ideas that we have discussed today, that you've seen in the webinar, do you think you could apply them in any way? Is there any idea that came up to you during the webinar? Things of the reader. Okay, cool, Alcione. I think helping them make this decision of filming it in the classroom or at home, or perhaps even not filming at all and coming up with a different product can be very useful as well. And again, I'm pretty sure the student will remember that you gave him choice and that it helped this choice helps them feel more comfortable. Great, Tamara. And I think now you can keep track of their choices and maybe see what kind of things have been helping them learn more and have been not very useful for their learning. So what is interesting about differentiation is that I think that we've been focusing a lot on how to teach things, and we talk about teaching tools and teaching techniques and learning different approaches to teach students, but we sometimes forget the aspect of learning. And then the question is, how do students learn best? And I think we have to explore this more deeply. So is it building a blog together? Is it making a video? Is it writing a composition? Is it discussing their ideas? It's really important that we shift our perspective from the teaching only to the learning, so that we make the teaching decisions later. Not saying, of course, you don't have to have a repertoire of teaching techniques. You do, because once you've spotted something, then you need to make a decision. But I think we also have to focus on the learning aspect. We're gonna have to end our discussion now because the time of the webinar is over. But if you have any other questions, I would be glad to be discussing this in further detail. We're also gonna have another webinar this week on Thursday at 3 p.m. And in this webinar here, we were looking at different cases instead of only one case. We talked about what differentiation is and why we should differentiate. We looked at some examples of how differentiation can happen in our lessons, and we discussed some other ideas right now. And oh, Tamara, okay. I think with kids, you would have to explore a little bit of how kids learn and what really young learners find more interesting in lessons, because this can be a very good starting point for you. You can find some reading texts available in our library on Moodle as well. And we've got some webinars on dealing with young learners and how they learn in our courses as well. I would super recommend watching these other webinars too. Thank you very much for your participation, Tamara and Alcione. Thank you guys for watching the webinar. Keep up with us. We're going to have another webinar on Thursday, and we're having different webinars on different topics all throughout this term. Thank you very much. I'll see you around, okay? Bye-bye.